Hey guys, tonight we're climbing a narrow set of stone steps, warm under your feet from the day's sun, until you emerge onto a flat rooftop open to the inky Mughal sky. Above you, the constellations hang like scattered jewels. The hum of the city below is softened by distance, replaced by a faint, unfamiliar perfume drifting through the warm night air. This is no palace party, though. It's an observatory. And you're standing in the middle of an empire where time itself is measured not by bells or sand, but by the slow burn of a candle, its wax laced with scents so rare they could ransom a prince. You probably wouldn't survive here without the right introductions. Wander into the wrong courtyard after dark, and you might be mistaken for a thief or a rival court spy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air up here feels different, cooler, scented with jasmine from nearby gardens, and also something else, faintly smoky and warm. You notice rows of candles set in bronze holders along the walls. Each is slightly different in color and height, and each seems to release a particular fragrance into the night. A man in a long, star-patterned robe, one of the Mughal court astronomers, glances at you, and then at a candle halfway burned, nodding to himself as though checking a clock. In this empire, the science of the sky was bound to the art of timekeeping, and timekeeping was bound, oddly enough, to fragrance. The concept is simple in theory: a candle of a specific thickness, infused with a precise mixture of oils and resins, will burn for a predictable span. The scent released at each stage of melting becomes a cue for the astronomer, who pairs it with a glance at the stars to pinpoint the exact moment of night. Historians still argue whether this practice originated in the Mughal court or was adapted from earlier Persian or Chinese traditions. What's clear is that by the late 16th century, under emperors like Akbar and Jahangir, these candlelit observatories became more than just scientific spaces. They were stages for a nightly performance of empire, where knowledge of time meant power over schedules, ceremonies, and even military planning. You wander past a low table covered in parchment charts. One shows neat arcs and points mapping the progress of Mars. Another is dotted with cryptic notations that look like perfume recipes. A young apprentice is shaving thin curls of wax from a spare candle, his hand steady despite the darkness. Each curl releases a puff of sandalwood into the air. You imagine that if someone swapped out a candle for one with a cheaper scent or wrong burn rate, the court's schedule could slide out of alignment. A royal dinner late, a military patrol mistimed. The astronomer gestures for you to join him at the wall. He points to the north, where the pole star hangs unwavering, and then to a single candle nearly burned down. The scent, sharp and resinous, like frankincense, tells him it's the second watch of the night. He explains in a low voice that each candle in the sequence burns exactly 2 hours, and that tonight's series is a blend of rose at the first watch, frankincense at the second, ambergris at the third, and musk at the last before dawn. You realize the effect isn't just practical, it's calming. The fragrances mingle with the cool air, settling your thoughts in a way that makes you feel more attuned to the slow passage of time. The astronomer chuckles, saying that even the emperor himself claims to think more clearly under the scent of ambergris, and that perhaps the stars respond better to sweet air somewhere below. You hear a faint rustle of silk and the sound of a lute string being plucked. A messenger passes silently, glancing at the candle to check his own timing before slipping away toward the palace. The scent has become the heartbeat of the night, steady, reliable, and invisible, guiding not just science but the entire choreography of life in the Mughal court. And as you lean against the wall, breathing in the faint, spiced smoke, you can't help but think that modern clocks, for all their precision, might be missing something. This softness, this quiet acknowledgement that time is not just numbers but an atmosphere you can inhale. The next morning, or rather, the next watch before dawn, you find yourself in a part of the palace you hadn't seen before. It's tucked away behind a courtyard of citrus trees, the air still holding the cool sweetness of night. Here is where the masters of wax and wick ply their craft, a group so valued that they answer directly to the chief astronomer and, on occasion, the emperor himself. You step inside a long, low workshop, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. Not the sharp bite of molten tallow, but a layered, almost dizzying blend of saffron, vetiver, sandalwood, rose, and something unfamiliar, perhaps a resin from the far western coast, traded through dangerous mountain passes. The chandlers here are not simply candle makers. They are mathematicians of melt rates, chemists of perfume, and, if you squint a little, minor magicians. Each candle they produce must burn with unwavering consistency. A wick too thin, and it flickers out before its appointed hour. Too thick, and it blazes through its measure before the stars have shifted. You watch an elderly man, his hair tied neatly in a white turban, roll a wick between his fingers. His touch is gentle, almost reverent, as though coaxing the cotton to remember its purpose. A young apprentice ladles molten wax from a copper pot into tall, narrow molds. The liquid gleams in the dim light, and the scent that rises from it is like the first note of a song you've only just learned to hum. The wax is not all beeswax, too soft for precision, but a blend of beeswax, palm wax, and a trace of a hard resin called damar, which helps it burn evenly. Historians still argue whether this blend was a local invention or imported knowledge from Southeast Asia, where resinous candles had long been used in temples. Over in one corner, a ledger lies open. It's not a list of orders, but a record of experiments. Ambergris, 1 dram, wick braid 3-ply, burn time, 1 hour, 57 minutes. You run your fingers over the ink and wonder at the patience it takes to keep such exact notes. A chandler notices your curiosity and grins, explaining that each scent has its own burning character. Rose oil burns a touch faster than sandalwood, while musk, dense and earthy, slows the flame. Balancing these is as much art as it is science. The chandlers also guard their color codes closely. Each candle is tinted subtly, never garish, just enough so that in the dim of the observatory, the astronomer can tell at a glance which is next. A pale blush for rose, a deeper honey for frankincense, a near black for musk. If the wind from the palace garden sweeps in too strongly, the burn rate can shift by minutes, enough to throw an entire night's measurements into question. One chandler claims he can read a candle's future burn just by sniffing it, though another rolls his eyes and mutters about superstition. On a workbench sits a box of tiny brass weights, each the size of a fingernail. The chandlers use them not for scales, but to test draft currents in the workshop. They hang the weights from gossamer threads to see if the air stirs. If it does, the batch is paused until conditions are still. A candle born on a windy day, they say, will never keep good time. Outside the workshop, a servant brings a message from the court. Tonight there will be a rare conjunction of Venus and Jupiter, and the emperor will watch from the observatory. The chandlers nod gravely, already selecting their most reliable blends. You realize that their work, though quiet and unseen, is woven into the grand theater of the empire. Without their steady flames, the Emperor's gaze at the stars might fall a minute too soon or too late, missing the moment entirely. As you leave, one of the older chandlers slips you a small stub of candle, its wax cool and fragrant in your palm. "Rose," he says, "for the first watch. Burn it when you want time to feel slower." You tuck it away, wondering whether, centuries from now, anyone will still know how to measure the hours by scent alone. The day drifts into evening, and the Mughal court begins its slow transformation. The chatter of merchants in the bazaar fades, the clang of metalworkers quiets, and the palace fills with the soft shuffle of servants preparing for the night. You find yourself once again climbing the steps to the observatory, the stub of rose-scented candle still tucked in your pocket. Tonight, though, you're not here for stargazing. You're here to watch the real magic, how fragrance becomes the clock hand of an empire. The astronomer greets you with a nod, then gestures to a sequence of tall, elegant candles arranged on a polished bronze stand. Each candle is labeled not with numbers, but with tiny ivory plaques engraved with floral patterns, curling vines, or stylized animals. He explains that the designs correspond to scents: rose for the first watch, frankincense for the second, ambergris for the third, musk for the fourth. Even in low light, the astronomers can tell them apart instantly. As the first candle is lit, a thin curl of smoke rises, carrying the unmistakable sweetness of rose oil. The scent drifts out into the open air, where it will be caught by everyone stationed on the rooftop: scholars, scribes, messengers, signaling that the first phase of the night's observations has begun. You realize the effect is both functional and atmospheric. The fragrance travels farther than the flicker of the flame, reaching those whose eyes are fixed to the sky rather than the stand. The astronomer walks you through the timing. Each candle is measured to burn for exactly 2 hours, and within those 2 hours, there are scent milestones layered into the wax. In the rose candle, for example, the first 30 minutes are pure rose oil, then a gradual shift to vetiver, and finally a faint note of saffron. These transitions aren't just for variety. They tell the astronomers how deep into the watch they are without looking away from their instruments. Historians still argue whether this layered scent method was inspired by Chinese incense clocks or developed independently. The Chinese versions often used powdered incense pressed into intricate patterns, each burning in a predictable sequence, while the Mughal innovation took advantage of wax's ability to trap and release oils in controlled intervals. One historian you overhear insists that it was the influence of Central Asian traders who carried both silk and scent recipes. Another insists the Mughals devised it themselves, blending Islamic astronomical precision with the subcontinent's perfumery traditions. As the night deepens, the candles are changed one by one. The rose fades to frankincense, a dry, resinous scent that feels heavier, almost meditative. You notice how the scholar's posture shifts. Conversations drop to murmurs. The scratching of quills slows. The scent seems to pull everyone into a quieter, more focused state. Later will come ambergris, warm and faintly oceanic, and finally musk, grounding the long night with an earthy, lingering presence. The astronomer lets you hold a freshly prepared ambergris candle. It's surprisingly heavy for its size, the wax cool and smooth, the faint aroma only revealing itself when warmed by the heat of your hands. He explains that the candles are stored in clay jars before use, to preserve their scent and prevent the oils from evaporating in the Mughal heat. You lean against the low wall of the observatory, the city spread out in shadows below. Somewhere beyond the palace grounds, a muezzin's call to the night prayer drifts over the rooftops, mingling with the candle's fragrance. Time here doesn't tick or chime. It breathes. It exhales in rose and inhales in frankincense. There's a quiet humor in it, too. The astronomer tells you of a time when a clumsy servant mixed up the order of the candles, starting the night with musk instead of rose. The entire observatory staff found themselves inexplicably sluggish, their calculations taking twice as long, and the emperor finally declaring that the stars seemed uncooperative. After that, the candles were always kept under lock and key until the moment of lighting. You begin to understand that for the Mughal astronomers, scent was more than a signal. It was part of the rhythm of their minds. The fragrances cued not just the passage of time, but the shifting mental states needed for long hours of observation. It's a kind of science modern watches could never offer. A clock that not only tells you the time, but shapes the way you feel in it. You don't have to wait long to see how these fragrant hours unfold in the most important schedule of all, the emperor's. Tonight, the rooftop observatory isn't the quiet retreat it was before. Palace guards in polished mail stand at intervals along the walls, their spears catching stray glints from the moonlight. Courtiers in silks murmur at the edges, their words carried away by the warm night breeze. And in the center, under a canopy stitched with gold thread to mimic the constellations, sits the emperor himself. Robed in deep blue and crowned with a turban set with a single, gleaming emerald, the astronomers are already at work. A rose-scented candle marks the start of the evening, and its sweetness mingles with the faint aroma of a tar the emperor favors. You watch as a courtier discreetly checks the candle's progress before leaning down to whisper in the emperor's ear. Immediately, a servant signals to the musicians at the far end of the terrace, and the first notes of the night's performance rise into the air. This is not coincidence. It's choreography. In the Mughal court, time wasn't just measured, it was staged. The emperor's nightly activities, dining, listening to poetry, discussing military matters, even pausing for contemplation, were all set to the tempo of the candles. As the rose gives way to frankincense, you notice the shift. Musicians trade lively rhythms for slower, more intricate ragas. Servants move more softly. Conversations draw into smaller clusters. The change in fragrance is a subtle cue for everyone present to settle into the next phase of the evening. Historians still argue whether this elaborate schedule was meant to project imperial control over time itself, or whether it was simply a refined luxury. You can see both arguments in action. On one hand, the emperor appears to command the night as if it bends to his will. On the other, you sense that he genuinely enjoys the order and beauty of the ritual, as though the scents themselves anchor him in the moment. At one point, a messenger arrives bearing a sealed scroll. The astronomer on duty glances at the candle. Its flame has just begun to reveal the faint spice of saffron, the halfway mark of the second watch. The emperor breaks the seal and reads, nodding thoughtfully before passing it to his vizier. A decision is made on the spot, perhaps influenced by the quiet steadiness of the scent. You think about modern meetings, how they're dictated by flashing screens and phone buzzes, and wonder if a whiff of rose or frankincense might make them less frantic. When the ambergris candle is lit for the third watch, the emperor orders the canopy drawn back so he can see the sky directly. The scent is warm, almost oceanic, and it pairs perfectly with the deepening night. The musicians have stopped. Now the only sounds are the faint scratch of a quill from a scribe recording celestial positions, and the rustle of robes as courtiers adjust their seating. The emperor watches the horizon intently, waiting for the moment when Venus and Jupiter will appear to kiss. The astronomer leans close to you, explaining that the timing of the candles tonight is critical. The conjunction should occur midway through the ambergris watch. If the burn is too fast, The Emperor might be interrupted by the scent shift to musk before the planets align, disrupting the harmony of the night. It's an oddly fragile arrangement, where cosmic events and melting wax share the same stage. When the moment comes, it's quiet enough to hear the soft hiss of the candle's wick. Two bright points in the sky draw near, shining like gems above the dark silhouette of the city. The Emperor smiles faintly, and you catch the satisfied glance he throws at the astronomer. Somewhere in that look is the knowledge that the timing, both celestial and scented, has been perfect as the musk candle begins its slow, earthy burn. The Emperor rises, signaling the end of the night's formalities. You watch him disappear into the shadowed stairwell, his robes brushing past the guards, the scent of musk lingering behind. The rooftop slowly empties, but the candles keep burning, their flames steady in the dark, as though holding the night a little longer just for you. You leave the palace rooftop still carrying the memory of musk and moonlight. But your night isn't over. A few hours later, you find yourself far from the marble courtyards, riding alongside a caravan that hugs the edge of the desert. The camels plod in steady rhythm, their padded feet whispering against the sand. Above, the sky is wide and unbroken, the stars clear enough to look like frost scattered across black silk. Here, the timekeeping candles aren't made for emperors, they're for survival. Your guide, a wiry man with a headscarf wrapped snugly against the wind, explains that caravan guards use a simpler but no less ingenious version of the Mughal candle clock. Theirs are poured thick and squat to withstand the open air, with a scent strong enough to drift past the smell of camel and leather. As he speaks, the guard at the front of the caravan lights the first candle of the night. A strong wave of clove and sandalwood pushes through the chill air. The guard doesn't glance at the stars. Not yet. This first candle simply marks the setting off hour after sunset prayers. Its burn is calibrated to last until the camels reach the next designated rest point. When the scent changes, this one will shift to a peppery frankincense. It signals the end of that leg and the start of the next watch. Historians still argue whether desert caravans learned this trick from the astronomers, or whether it was an older method adapted into courtly science later. Some point to evidence from Arabian incense clocks used in trade caravans centuries before the Mughal period. Others claim the Mughals exported the idea outward, a luxury version that traders then simplified. The caravan's version is pragmatic. The scents are chosen for their resilience in wind and their ability to mask less pleasant smells. Your guide jokes that frankincense is less spiritual here and more defensive against the odor of sweaty camel. Still, there's an elegance to it. When the guards smell the switch from sandalwood to frankincense, they don't need to fumble for an hourglass or consult the stars. They know exactly when to change formations or switch shifts. The desert at night is not silent. You hear the hiss of sand shifting in the wind, the creak of leather harnesses, and somewhere in the distance, the short bark of a fox. The candle burns in a tall iron lantern, its light diffused but its scent carried forward and back by the moving air. The guards ride in staggered positions so that each one can catch a trace of it. In a place where darkness can play tricks on your sense of distance, scent becomes a tether holding the caravan together. You find yourself drifting a little in the saddle, lulled by the rhythm of hoof and foot, until the peppery note of frankincense jolts your attention. The guard up front raises a hand, and the entire caravan slows. Camels kneel, traders climb down, and without a word, positions are exchanged. Fresh guards take the lead, and those who began the night now fall back to rest. The candle, now half burned, is carefully extinguished and wrapped in cloth to be reused for the return journey. As the new candle is lit, a thick plume of myrrh rises. The smell is resinous, a little bitter, but grounding. You inhale and feel how it changes the night, less open and airy, more enclosed, as if the desert itself leans closer. The guide remarks that myrrh marks the watch when the cold deepens, when the air becomes sharp enough to bite through wool. It's also the time when most dangers strike. Bandits, wild animals, or the sudden disorientation of losing the trail. The scent becomes a kind of mental armor, telling the guards, "Be alert now." You glance at the horizon and see the faintest paling in the east. Soon the last candle will burn, a cedar and cinnamon blend for dawn. The guide says it's his favorite, because when it burns, you know you've made it through another night alive. And as the first shy streaks of daylight touch the sand, you find you agree. The scent is warm, like homecoming. Even here, in the endless openness, that night, when the souk had fallen silent and the minarets stood like sentinels against the starlit sky, you walk alone to the edge of the desert. The sands stretch before you like an ocean turned to gold, and in the hush, you feel the weight of unseen eyes. From the shadow of a lone palm, a figure steps forward, tall, cloaked in midnight blue, the face hidden behind a veil of fine gauze. The stranger's voice is low and smooth, like water flowing over polished stones. They speak of the thing you seek, of a treasure not counted in coins or jewels but in power, the power to bind the will of another. All they ask in return is something simple, or so it seems, a single word, spoken at dawn on the highest dune, when the world is neither night nor day. The request coils around your thoughts, as mysterious as the figure themselves. Before you can ask their name, the wind rises, sand stinging your cheeks, and when it clears, they are gone, leaving only the faint impression of bare feet in the moonlit dunes. The morning comes to you not with the sound of bird song, but with the layered chorus of the marketplace, 100 voices, 100 trades, each trying to rise above the others. You step into it as though into the tide, letting it pull you forward. The air is heavy with scents that compete and collide. Sharp coriander, smoky lamb fat sizzling on an open grill, the sweetness of dried figs dusted in flour, the faint bitterness of fresh olive leaves crushed underfoot. It is a world of brass and smoke, and you are swallowed by it whole. The awnings overhead are patched and repatched, their faded reds and blues flapping like banners in a slow wind. Each stall seems more crowded than the last, each merchant more determined to convince you their goods are the only ones worth your coin. "Fine glass from Damascus!" shouts one, holding up goblets that catch the light like frozen rain. "Cloth from the far south, softer than a baby's sigh," calls another, running his hands through bolts of fabric in deep indigo, scarlet, and ochre. Between them, a boy carries a tray of dates so dark they shine almost purple, and he weaves through the crowd with the precision of a sparrow in flight. You pass through like a shadow, watching, absorbing, though not yet buying. In this city, to buy too quickly is to insult the dance, the bargaining, the feigned reluctance, the mock outrage. This is not just trade, it is theater, and you are expected to play your role. Somewhere to your left, a man with a face like cracked stone is selling copper coffee pots. Each one is dented in a way that makes it seem personal, as if it has already had a life, already poured coffee for friends whose laughter lingers somewhere inside its curves. He catches your eye and nods, but does not call out. That is his game, to seem above the clamor, to make you curious enough to approach. The crowd shifts, and you are swept toward the spice sellers. Here the air changes again, heavy, warm, alive with the smell of ground cinnamon, crushed cloves, saffron threads that look like embers scattered on the wind. One merchant invites you to cup your hands while he pours in a small hill of powdered cardamom. The scent bursts upward, rich and almost sweet, and for a moment you are back in another time, another place, in a courtyard with a tiled fountain, sipping thick coffee while someone hums an old song in the background. "Good for the heart," the merchant says, his eyes narrowing as if he has just read the memory on your face. "Good for the dreams, too." You thank him and move on. The further you go, the more the marketplace changes. The stalls become stranger, more specialized. One sells nothing but keys, hundreds of them, hung like wind chimes, each one with a history you could almost feel if you touched it. Another stall is filled with cages, and inside are birds with feathers in impossible colors, turquoise that glows like sky at dawn, yellow so deep it seems to drink in the light instead of reflecting it. A single white bird stares at you with unblinking eyes, and for a second you feel as though you have been recognized. There is music here, too. The thin, reedy notes of a flute from one direction, the low drum beat from another, and over it all, the constant murmur of haggling, like a river that never stops. A narrow lane opens to your right, half hidden by hanging carpets. You slip inside. The noise softens. The light shifts, filtered now through the weave of wool and silk. These carpets are not just for the floor. They are stories, cities, rivers, battles. One shows a garden so lush you can almost hear the water in its streams. Another shows a night sky filled with stars that seem to be in motion, though your eyes know they are still. In the back, a man sits cross-legged, knotting thread into a pattern that has no beginning and no end. He does not look up when you pass. When you emerge, you find yourself at the edge of the metalworkers' quarter. Here, the air rings with the sharp clink of hammer on bronze, the hiss of hot metal meeting water. Shapes take form in the smoke, a brass ewer shaped like a lion, an iron lock with a keyhole like a crescent moon, silver bracelets thin as the rim of a teacup. The heat is enough to make your skin prickle, but you linger, watching the sparks jump like fireflies. A woman with a soot-smudged face holds up a small object, a coin, or perhaps a token, and offers it to you with a half-smile. "For luck," she says, "or for passage, depending on the gate." You take it. It is heavier than it looks. By the time you reach the far edge of the market, the day is beginning to soften. The light has taken on a more golden hue, and the merchants are more willing to make deals now, their energy for bargaining dulled by hours of trade. You realize you have not bought a thing, yet somehow you feel as if you are carrying a dozen invisible parcels. Just beyond the last row of stalls, the city opens into a wide courtyard shaded by plane trees. In the center, a fountain gurgles lazily, its basin stained green with moss. Around it, people sit in small clusters, drinking tea, telling stories, playing quiet games of backgammon. You take a seat on the fountain's edge and let the rhythm of the place wash over you. From here, you can see the market in its entirety, the movement, the color, the smoke rising in thin columns. It feels alive, like a single breathing thing. Somewhere in its heart, you know. There are secrets, hidden trades, whispered bargains, goods that never see the daylight. But those are not for you, not today. Today is about the drift, the slow collecting of impressions, the taste of cardamom still lingering on your tongue, the weight of a strange coin in your pocket. As the sun dips lower, you stand and make your way toward the northern street, where the shadows grow long and the air begins to cool. Somewhere ahead, the city will change again. New scents, new sounds, new currents to follow. And you will follow them, because that is what you came here to do. You follow the caravan's fading silhouette until it becomes no more than a thread of shadow against the silver blue of the desert. The air is still, as if the sand itself is listening. You turn back toward the oasis, toward the tallest date palm at its center. Its fronds stir without wind, whispering like a voice speaking in a language too old for human ears. At the base of the tree, you notice something you had not seen before, a small clay jar, sealed with a stopper of wax. The jar is plain, unpainted, yet its presence here feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. You kneel, running your fingers over its surface. The clay is cool, impossibly so, as if it remembers a river far from here. When you lift it, the weight surprises you. Not heavy, but dense, as though the air inside it has been folded over itself 1,000 times. You think of the old stories you heard as a child, the ones about vessels that hold not water, but spirits. And then, in the hush of the oasis, you hear it, a voice, not quite sound, not quite thought, but both. It curls through your mind like smoke. Traveler, open it, and the night will owe you a favor. The stopper feels warm beneath your thumb now, as though it has been waiting for your touch. You hesitate. You remember the warnings. A bargain with a djinn is never truly yours. It is always shared. Yet something in the air tells you this moment will not come again. With a slow breath, you break the seal. The wax gives way with a muted crack, and a thin thread of light spills upward, twisting into a pale figure that is neither shadow nor flame. The djinn's face is unreadable, its eyes like deep water, its mouth curved in the faintest smile. 3 nights from now, it says, you will find the place where the wind stands still. There, you may ask for what you desire most, but only once. The words vanish as the light dissolves back into the jar. The stopper reforms as if it had never been broken. You stand beneath the date palm, the jar in your hands, the night around you vast and silent. Somewhere far off, the caravan bells fade into nothing, and you realize the true weight you carry now is not the jar itself, but the choice it will demand. You wake before dawn, not because of any alarm, but because the room is steeped in that particular quiet that only exists when the rest of the world is still asleep. The blackout curtains have done their work, but the faintest suggestion of light filters through a gap, casting a pale stripe across the wooden desk at the far wall. Somewhere outside, the street is empty save for the distant murmur of a milk truck making its rounds. You pull yourself upright, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders from hours of leaning over documents the night before. The notes are still there, spread across the table like the aftermath of a hurried evacuation. Open folders, maps with red ink annotations, a cup of tea long gone cold. The war, you remind yourself, is as much a battle of endurance as it is of strategy. And right now, endurance means getting ready for another day in the archives. Not the grand, public archives filled with scholars and tourists, but the tucked-away room beneath the ministry, where the air smells faintly of paper dust and oil from the heating pipes. It's the kind of room where whispers echo, and where the ceiling feels just a touch too low for comfort. Downstairs, the kettle hums. You pour yourself tea with the efficiency of someone who knows every movement counts, even in peacetime. Mornings have a way of slipping away unnoticed. The steam curls into your face, carrying the faint bite of black leaves steeped too long. As you sip, your thoughts drift to the documents you'll be reviewing today. Coded transmissions intercepted from enemy lines, written in languages you don't fully understand but can almost feel your way through. There's a rhythm to them, a pattern hidden beneath the noise, like the underlying beat of a song you can't quite name. By the time you reach the ministry's side entrance, the sun has climbed just enough to lay pale gold across the stone facade. You slip inside, greeted not by a bustling reception, but by a single guard who nods without words. Your footsteps carry you down a corridor lined with peeling paint and closed office doors, the sort that have brass nameplates but no real sign of activity behind them. At the end of the hall, a narrow staircase descends into a cooler, dimmer world. The archive room hasn't changed since you were last here. Wooden cabinets stand like sentinels along the walls, their drawers labeled in blocky, utilitarian handwriting, A.E. F.J. Miscellaneous. A round table in the center bears the marks of decades of use. Scratches, ink stains, and the occasional cigarette burn from the days when smoking indoors was simply part of the job. You set your satchel down and pull the first file from the stack waiting for you. The morning passes in a kind of suspended silence. You sift through telegrams, official reports, and handwritten notes that have passed through dozens of hands before yours. Some are brittle, edges flaking away like old leaves. Others are crisp, their ink still sharp against the paper. You begin to notice oddities, a peculiar choice of phrasing repeated in different documents, a string of numbers embedded in an otherwise ordinary supply request, a series of place names that seem to form an invisible chain across the map. The work is slow, but you feel that faint hum of progress, the same hum that has kept you coming back day after day. Around midday, the spell breaks. The heavy door swings open, and a man in a dark suit steps inside, the smell of rain clinging to his coat. He's not from your department. You can tell by the polished leather briefcase and the slight air of someone accustomed to higher ceilings and better lighting. Without preamble, he sets the case on the table and flips the clasps. Inside is a single folder, bound with a strip of navy ribbon. "This came in last night," he says, his voice low but steady. "You'll want to look at it before anyone else." The folder is heavier than you expect. Inside are a series of photographs, grainy, black and white images of a coastal installation you've never seen before. The angles are odd, as if taken from great distance through imperfect glass. Alongside the photographs are sheets of typed notes, the margins crowded with handwritten annotations. Some of the writing you recognize, others are in an unfamiliar hand, but the urgency is unmistakable. As you read, the air in the room seems to shift. The installation in the photographs is not merely a supply depot, as the cover sheet claims. The annotations suggest something far more significant, an operation underway that could alter the balance of the war if left unchecked. But there's no conclusive proof yet, only fragments, and fragments are dangerous things. They can point to the truth, or they can lead you astray entirely. You spend the next hours cross-referencing the photographs with old maps, with shipping logs, with obscure reports from regions most people couldn't place on a globe. The pattern you thought you saw earlier in the day sharpens now, as though the new documents have provided the missing lines in an unfinished sketch. The coastal installation, the intercepted messages, the peculiar string of place names, they are all connected. The realization brings both clarity and a prickling unease. By late afternoon, the room has cooled noticeably. The radiator clanks, releasing a faint metallic scent into the air. You glance at the clock and realize you've been sitting in the same position for hours. The tea from earlier, untouched beside you. The man in the dark suit has not returned, and you're left with the quiet, the files, and the faint throb of your own heartbeat. You gather the documents back into their folder, taking care to replace the navy ribbon exactly as you found it. In this line of work, order is not merely a preference, it is a safeguard. One misplaced paper, one carelessly handled file, can unravel months of work. You lock the folder in the cabinet marked "Temporary Holds," its key heavy and cold in your palm, When you finally step back out into the evening air, the city feels different. The rain has stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the glow of the lamps. Somewhere nearby, a church bell chimes the hour. You pull your coat tighter, the cool air sharpening your senses. The day's work is done, but its weight follows you, a quiet reminder that in times like these, nothing is ever truly finished. And as you walk, you can't help but wonder who else is looking at those photographs tonight, and what decisions they will make when they do. You move along the dim corridor, every step cushioned by a carpet so worn it has surrendered its pattern to the years. The walls here are different, closer, almost leaning in. Their plaster bulges where pipes have swelled beneath, and every so often you hear the faint clink of metal cooling, as though someone has just stepped away from a kettle. Somewhere behind these walls, unseen, there is life, breathing, shifting, waiting. You tell yourself it is only the building settling, but the rhythm of those hidden sounds seems a little too deliberate, like the slow tapping of fingers on a desk. At the far end, the hallway meets a half-open door. The brass handle is dulled, not by neglect, but by the 1,000 palms that have passed over it. You can smell the room beyond before you enter, a blend of tobacco smoke and damp wool, with something sharper beneath, ink, perhaps, or the faint sting of turpentine. You push the door gently and it yields with a tired groan. Inside, the space is narrow but tall, the ceiling lost in shadow. The windows are shuttered tight, though a single shaft of pale light has found its way through a crack, spilling across a desk so cluttered it looks like the workbench of a watchmaker. Papers are stacked in tilting towers, their edges curled, each marked with a faint sepia bruise of age. Between them, glass jars glint, some filled with tiny screws, others with powders you cannot name. In one, floating in a liquid the color of old honey, rests what appears to be the fragment of a bird's skull. The man behind the desk sits so still, you wonder at first if he has been carved there. His suit is not quite black, but a deep bottle green, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. His face is long, the skin weathered into fine creases that radiate from the corners of his eyes like sunbursts. He does not look up immediately. Instead, he finishes the slow turning of a small brass object in his hands, the motion precise, deliberate. Only when the piece clicks into place does he raise his gaze to meet yours. "You're late," he says, though there is no clock in the room. You offer an apology, though you are not sure for what. And he waves it away as if swatting a dust mote from the air. "Time," he murmurs, "is not a thing to be kept. It is a thing to be followed, like a shadow. You'll learn that." He gestures for you to sit in the single chair opposite. The seat sags beneath your weight, the stuffing shifted so that one side is lower than the other. From here, you notice the desk is not just cluttered, it is a map of someone's mind, each object a marker in some private geography. A brass compass, its lid dented, rests beside a sheaf of papers written in a looping, hurried hand. A magnifying lens leans against a block of carved wood etched with symbols you do not recognize. He watches you, and you feel the scrutiny in the stillness between his blinks. "Do you know why you've been called here?" he asks. You begin to shake your head, but he interrupts. "Of course you don't. That's the point." He reaches beneath the desk and produces a small, flat box no larger than a book. The surface is of dark oak, polished to a dull sheen, and the clasp is shaped like a crescent moon. He places it before you with the care one might give to a sleeping animal. "Open it," he says. The clasp yields easily, and inside, nested in deep red felt, is a sheet of thin, brittle paper. At first you think it is blank, but as the light shifts, faint lines begin to appear, like ink bleeding slowly through from the other side. Shapes take form, curves and spirals, a lattice of fine lines that seem both organic and mechanical. It is not a map in any sense you recognize, and yet it feels navigational. It will change, he says softly, depending on who holds it. And it will only change once. You look up, unsure whether to ask what it means, but his eyes have moved past you, to the far corner of the room. You follow his gaze and see a tall cabinet, its glass front obscured by a curtain of black cloth. For a moment, you think the fabric shifts, as if stirred by a breath from within. The man stands and crosses to it, his movements soundless. He does not draw the curtain aside, only rests his hand against it. Some doors, he says, are not meant to be opened, but they are meant to be guarded. You understand the difference? You nod, though the truth is you are not entirely sure. Good, he replies, returning to his chair. Because you will be the one to stand watch, when the time comes. And it is coming sooner than you think. There is a knock at the door. 3 slow raps, evenly spaced. The man's expression tightens, though his voice remains calm. We're finished here. Take the box. Keep it shut until you have no other choice. You hesitate, but his gaze leaves no room for argument. You slip the box into your coat, its weight far greater than its size suggests. When you rise to leave, he says one last thing, almost as an afterthought. Remember, time doesn't keep you. It follows you, and it is closer now. You step back into the hallway, the door closing behind you with a soft click. The air feels heavier out here, the walls even closer than before. At the far end, the corridor splits in 2 directions. For a moment, you are certain you remember which way you came, but now both paths look equally unfamiliar. The carpet underfoot is the same threadbare pattern, the lights the same dim yellow. You glance back over your shoulder, but the door is gone, replaced by an unbroken stretch of wall, somewhere, from deep within the building. A low hum begins, a sound you feel more in your bones than in your ears. It is steady, like the turning of some hidden machinery, but there is an edge to it, a vibration that makes the hair on your arms rise. You clutch the box in your coat, feeling the faintest warmth emanating from within. You choose a direction, though it feels less like choosing and more like being drawn, and begin to walk. The hum grows louder, the lights above flickering in a slow, uneven rhythm. With each step, the hallway narrows until your shoulders brush the walls. Then, without warning, the floor beneath you shifts, not downwards, but as if it has begun to turn, a great wheel rotating underfoot. You quicken your pace, though the narrowing passage slows you, and just as you think you may be trapped entirely, the corridor widens into a small, round chamber. The walls here are lined with shelves, each filled not with books but with rows of identical glass jars. Inside each jar, suspended in clear fluid, is a single object, a key. No 2 are alike. Some brass, some iron, some carved from bone. At the center of the room stands a pedestal, and upon it, a single empty jar. You step forward, your breath loud in the stillness, and the hum that followed you here seems to fade into the walls. The box in your coat feels heavier still, as though aware it has reached the place it was always meant to be. And from somewhere, above, below, you cannot tell, a voice you do not recognize whispers your name. You step out onto the wide, sun-baked courtyard of the citadel, the air thick with the mingling scents of dust, camel leather, and distant spice markets. The heat presses down like a living thing, yet it is not oppressive. It is slow, measured, almost drowsy in its weight. You hear the echo of your own footsteps across the flagstones, each one seeming to linger just a heartbeat longer than it should, as if the stones themselves remember every traveler who has passed before. From here, the city sprawls outward in a patchwork of ochre and sandstone, its winding alleys glimmering with sunlight that filters through strips of woven awning. Minarets rise like slender fingers against the sky, their pale stone catching the late morning light in soft gold. Somewhere below, merchants call in sing-song voices, bargaining over saffron, dates, and bolts of cloth dyed the color of ripe pomegranates. You cannot see their faces, only the flashes of hands moving in practiced gestures, one palm raised, another drawing inward, a quiet nod sealing an unspoken agreement. Closer to you, the guards stand in loose formation, their spears resting in the crook of their arms, eyes half-lidded against the glare. They seem more a part of the stone than men of flesh, silent, enduring, unblinking. One of them shifts slightly as you pass, the movement slow and deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of your presence. There is no urgency here, no hurried command, only the sense that life in this place has flowed the same way for generations, like water following an old, familiar channel. You take the stairs down from the citadel, each step worn smooth by centuries of feet. The air cools fractionally in the shaded archway, and for a moment, the noise of the city recedes, replaced by the quiet drip of water from a clay jar somewhere in the darkness. The smell changes too. Cool stone, damp earth, and a faint trace of oil from a lamp burning unseen. The walls here are etched with names, dates, and crude drawings, messages left by those who once waited in these shadows. Their marks are faint now, softened by time, but they remain, a chorus of silent voices, speaking across the ages. When you emerge into the lower streets, the air seems to hum, not with sound exactly, but with the feeling of a place alive with many lives at once. A woman balances a basket of figs on her head, moving with slow grace through the narrow lane. Two children crouch in the dust, drawing patterns with sticks, pausing only to glance up at you with wide, curious eyes before returning to their quiet game. The rhythm of the place is unhurried, yet constant, every movement deliberate, every sound softened by the warm air. You wander past a stall where a scribe bends over a piece of parchment, the tip of his reed pen scratching faintly. His hand moves like the turning of a wheel, steady, unbroken. The ink glistens wetly before sinking into the fiber of the page. He does not look up when you pass, but you sense that he knows you are there, that he knows everyone who passes, that he will remember the shape of your shadow long after you have gone. Beyond the market, the lane narrows still further until it becomes little more than a tunnel of mud brick and hanging cloth. Light filters down in thin threads, catching in the motes of dust that dance in the stillness. Here, the sounds are muffled. The call of the merchants fades to a murmur, replaced by the faint rustle of fabric and the occasional creak of wood overhead. You pause, letting your fingers trail along the wall. It is warm to the touch, the surface uneven, pitted by the hands that built it long ago. You turn a corner and step into a small courtyard where a fountain bubbles quietly at its center. The water catches the light in shifting patterns, dappling the worn tiles beneath. Around the edges, clay pots overflow with herbs, mint, basil, and something sharp and resinous you cannot name. The air here feels cooler, cleaner. You sit for a while on the low stone bench, watching the water arc and fall, as it has for perhaps hundreds of years. Above, a window shutter creaks open, and a woman leans out, shaking a rug in slow, practiced motions. Dust rises in a golden cloud, drifting lazily in the sunlight before settling once again. She glances down at you briefly, her gaze neither curious nor suspicious, merely noting your presence as part of the day's quiet unfolding. Then the shutter closes, and the courtyard is yours again. As you rise to leave, you notice a narrow passage at the far side. It is barely wide enough to pass through, the walls pressing in close. The light fades quickly here, and your footsteps echo differently, shorter, sharper. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faint clink of metal on stone, a sound too regular to be random. When you emerge, you find yourself in the workshop of a metalworker. He stands at a low bench, shaping a strip of brass with a small hammer, each tap ringing out in the warm air. He works without looking up, the rhythm unbroken, his world contained entirely within the arc of his hands and tools. You watch him for a time, drawn by the hypnotic steadiness of his movements. The smell of hot metal mingles with the tang of oil, the scent somehow grounding, anchoring you in this moment. When he finally pauses to place the finished piece among others on a shelf, you feel as though you have been allowed a glimpse into a private ritual, one that will continue long after you have moved on. The day drifts toward afternoon. The light shifts subtly, taking on a deeper hue, as if the city is beginning to exhale. Shadows lengthen in the alleys, curling along the edges of doorways and stalls. The air cools slightly, though the warmth lingers in the stones beneath your feet. Somewhere above, a bird calls, its cry stretching lazily over the rooftops. You begin to climb back toward the higher streets, each step carrying with it the soft weight of the day's impressions, the hum of the market, the scratch of the scribe's pen, the glint of brass under the metalworker's hammer. You pass once again under the archway into the citadel courtyard, where the guards stand just as before, their stillness undisturbed by the passing hours. The city seems unchanged, yet you feel the quiet shift within yourself. You have walked its veins, touched its bones, listened to the slow pulse that moves beneath its surface. And now, as the sun tilts lower in the sky, you carry that rhythm with you, steady and unbroken, like the turning of a wheel. You wake in the deep hours of the night, unsure what stirred you. The camp is quiet, too quiet. You think. The rhythmic breathing of your fellow soldiers fills the tent, mingling with the faint rustle of the wind through the surrounding trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. You sit up slowly, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders, the cool air prickling your skin. Outside, the darkness is near total. Only the occasional shimmer of starlight escapes through breaks in the low, creeping clouds. You hear the crunch of footsteps in the frost-hardened soil, slow, deliberate, almost measured, as though the one walking is not in a hurry but deeply aware of each step. You rise, slipping out of the tent, and find yourself face to face with a lone sentry. His helmet catches the faint gleam of the lantern he carries, a soft golden orb in the sea of black. The flame sways with his movement, shadows stretching and shrinking across the uneven ground. He nods to you, but says nothing, his expression hidden beneath the rim of his helm. His silence feels less like secrecy and more like a habit, the kind born from too many nights spent guarding a world most people never see. The air smells faintly of smoke from the evening's campfires, now reduced to cold ash. Somewhere down the line of tents, a muffled cough sounds, perhaps from the old sergeant who always complained of his lungs. The sentry continues past you, his lantern's glow fading, swallowed by the mist that has begun to roll in from the low ground. You watch as he disappears entirely, the light shrinking to nothing, leaving only the sound of his boots to tell you he's still there. A strange unease settles in your chest. You're not sure why. Perhaps it's the unnatural stillness, or the way the mist seems to carry faint whispers with it, voices that vanish the moment you strain to listen. You shake your head, convincing yourself it's just the wind, though deep down you feel it's something else. Deciding to walk the perimeter yourself, you keep your hand resting lightly on the hilt of your sword. The night air bites at your cheeks, but your senses feel sharper than they do in daylight. Every creak of leather, every distant rustle in the underbrush, every shift in the breathing of the camp reaches your ears. The mist thickens, swirling around your boots, coiling up to your knees like slow-moving smoke. You round the corner of the supply tent and stop. There, half lost in the fog, is another lantern, this one motionless, hanging from a low branch of a dead tree. Its light is dim, almost blue, unlike the warm yellow flame of the sentry's lamp. The shadows it casts seem wrong, stretched in unnatural angles that don't match the shape of the tree. You take a step closer, and the air grows colder still, a chill that seeps through cloak and tunic alike, finding your bones. The closer you get, the quieter the world becomes. Even the sound of your own footsteps feels muted, as though the fog has swallowed them whole. You reach for the lantern, but before your fingers can touch it, the flame sputters once, twice, and dies. In the instant it goes out, the mist rushes inward, a wall of white swallowing your vision completely. You freeze, every muscle tense. The silence is so deep it's suffocating. Then, faintly, you hear it, a sound like a distant drum, slow and steady, beating from somewhere out in the black. It grows louder, closer, until you realize it's not a drum at all, but the heavy, deliberate footfalls of someone or something approaching. Your hand tightens on your sword hilt. You strain your eyes, trying to pierce the fog, but see nothing. The footsteps halt. You hold your breath. Then, from just beyond the range of your vision, a voice speaks, a low, resonant murmur that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand on end. You can't make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. It's calling you. You take one cautious step forward. The voice fades, replaced by a faint metallic ringing, as though a blade is being drawn from its scabbard very, very slowly. The sound cuts off abruptly, replaced once more by silence. You stand there for what feels like an eternity before the mist begins to recede, the familiar shapes of tents and trees returning. The blue lantern is gone, the dead branch empty, somewhere behind you. The sentry's warm yellow light reappears. You turn to see him walking toward you, his lantern swaying gently. His face is still hidden beneath the shadow of his helm. But this time he speaks, his voice low and even. "Best to stay in the light, soldier. Things move differently in the dark." Before you can respond, he passes you, heading toward the far side of the camp. The mist doesn't seem to touch him. You watch until he disappears again, leaving you alone beneath the cold, starless sky. You return to your tent, but sleep does not come easily. Somewhere out there, you know the darkness is still moving, waiting. You had been told that the desert was honest, that it showed you what was real and stripped away all illusions. But that night, under the bloated amber moon, you learned the desert could also lie. It began with a ripple in the heat, though the air was cool enough to make your breath curl faintly in front of you. The sand shifted in strange patterns, like the surface of water stirred by an unseen breeze, and the horizon seemed to pulse in and out of focus. You blinked, but the scene only sharpened. There, in the distance, a city rose from the dunes. Its walls gleamed white as bone, crowned with towers of silver. each one crowned by a flame that burned with an emerald glow. Music, soft, haunting, and threaded with voices that sang in a language you almost recognized, drifted toward you. The camels hesitated, their great dark eyes rolling, and the guides muttered prayers under their breath. One of them, an older man whose beard was the color of storm clouds, whispered that this was the city of glass, a place that appeared to lost travelers, offering them rest before swallowing them whole. You told yourself it was a trick of the light, yet every step toward it deepened the illusion. The gates stood open, carved with spirals that shifted when you tried to focus on them. Inside, the streets were empty but warm, lined with fountains that poured crystal water into marble basins. Your thirst pulled you closer, even though every instinct screamed to turn away. When you leaned over the first fountain, you saw not your reflection, but the face of a stranger, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, lips curved in a sad smile. A voice, neither male nor female, spoke from nowhere and everywhere. Drink, and the desert will love you. Refuse, and it will forget you. You reached out, your fingers trembling, the scent of water filling your lungs like a memory. Then something moved in the corner of your vision, a flicker of red cloth vanishing into an alley. Without thinking, you followed. The alley twisted, narrow enough that the walls brushed your shoulders, until it opened into a courtyard filled with wind. At its center stood a tree that should not have been, a tamarisk, green and heavy with blossoms, its roots sunk deep into the sand. Beneath it, a figure waited, the old man from your caravan, though his eyes now glowed faintly green, like the flames atop the towers. "You have seen too much," he said, his voice flat and hollow. "This place was not meant for you." The sand beneath your feet began to move, rising in slow waves, pulling you backward toward the street. You tried to resist, but the more you struggled, the more it felt like the desert itself was dragging you away from the city's heart. The gates loomed ahead again, but now they were closing, the silver towers fading into mist. The music grew fainter, the voices more distant, until all that remained was the sound of the wind pushing through the dunes. When you turned to look back, the city was gone. Only moonlit sand stretched in every direction, and the others in your caravan insisted they had seen nothing at all. But as you lay down that night, you found a single tamarisk blossom tangled in your scarf, soft, fragrant, and impossible. You awake to the sound of merchants shouting their wares, their voices curling through the dusty morning air like tendrils of incense. Somewhere far from your narrow bed, a gong has been struck to announce the opening of the bazaar. This is not the sterile, well-ordered market of a modern city, but the labyrinthine tangle of an old quarter where each stall is as much a secret as it is a shop. The sun is still low, its light filtering through awnings of faded cloth in colors that once shouted, but now merely whisper. Ochre, crimson, indigo. Dust motes drift in the shafts of light, and the scent in the air is a confusion of the sacred and the profane. Cardamom and cloves jostling with the metallic tang of powdered minerals, the sweet rot of dried flowers mingling with the bitter smoke of resinous wood. You walk slowly, each step bringing new curiosities into view. To your left, an old apothecary squats behind a counter of polished cedar, his long beard tied in a knot, his fingers stained with something darker than ink. Before him are jars, some of glass, some of beaten copper, each labeled in a script you cannot read. You catch glimpses of what lies inside: dried lizards, bundles of herbs, powders in every shade from pale ash white to a blue so deep it seems to eat the light around it. The apothecary speaks to no one, his cloudy eyes fixed on the middle distance. You have heard whispers about him. Some say he was once a court physician to a sultan who ruled not by sword, but by the slow persuasion of tinctures and vapors. Others claim his remedies are stolen from dreams, not his own, but taken from those who have slept too close to his door. Further along, a woman in a scarlet headscarf offers wind in a bottle, small clay flasks stoppered with wax. She holds one up to your ear and shakes it gently. You hear nothing, but her eyes gleam as she insists that if you unseal it in the desert, it will summon a breeze from the year of your birth. She charges more for bottles from years with good harvests or rare celestial events. Beyond her stall, you pass the spice sellers. Their tables are layered with pyramids of powder so perfectly formed they might be sculpted rather than poured. Turmeric glows like crushed sunlight. Cinnamon lies in soft curls like shavings from an ancient tree, and black pepper gleams like beads of obsidian. But in between these familiar offerings are stranger heaps, a shimmering dust that smells faintly of mint, yet leaves your tongue numb when you breathe near it, and a dull red powder that the merchant insists must never be used in food. Unless, he adds with a wink, you are certain you wish to forget something forever. You pause at a stall that seems at first to be selling only trinkets, bits of metal, chipped tiles, fragments of bone, until you realize each object has been inscribed. The vendor, a woman with a voice like dry leaves, explains that these are remedy tokens. Each one holds the echo of a cure once performed, a copper disc for a fever broken, a shard of turquoise for a nightmare dispelled, a sliver of bone for a heart mended after loss. She says they no longer work, but some still carry a shadow of their old warmth. Near the heart of the market, you find the section the locals call the shade. Here, the awnings are heavier, the light dimmer, and the air thick with the scent of burning resin. The goods here are not laid out openly. They are kept in chests or undercloth, and only shown after a long, quiet conversation. This is where the lost remedies are said to be traded. Substances banned by rulers, discredited by scholars, or abandoned when their costs became too high. A thin man in a coat of stitched-together scraps beckons you over. From under his stall, he draws a jar filled with something that moves sluggishly, though it has no form you can name. He tells you it is moon sap, collected from the pale blossoms that open only when the moon is at its smallest. One drop under the tongue, he claims, will allow you to speak in the voice of anyone you have ever heard, but only for as long as it takes for a candle to burn down to its last finger's width. You do not buy the jar, though you are tempted. Instead, you drift toward the far edge of the market, where the noise softens and the crowd thins. Here, a few old traders sit in the shade, their goods laid out on blankets rather than in stalls. One offers you a folded scrap of parchment, insisting it contains the recipe for a tea that makes the drinker immune to lies, both hearing and speaking them. Another sells you nothing, but presses a small, smooth stone into your hand and tells you to keep it in your pocket until the day you feel truly lost. As you leave, you look back at the tangle of stalls. The shouts of the merchants blur into a single, wavering chorus. You know that most of what you saw was trickery, and yet you cannot shake the feeling that somewhere in that market lies a cure you have needed for a very long time. Not for the body, but for the quiet hunger that has followed you all your life. When you finally step back into the sunlight, the brightness is almost painful. The air tastes different here, free of the dense mingling of scents. You walk away slowly, the murmurs of the bazaar fading behind you, the smooth stone still warm in your hand. Somewhere deep in your chest, the hunger stirs, and for the first time, you wonder if it might someday be sated. The night before the great unveiling of the secret project is like no other. Outside. The city sleeps under a thin veil of mist, the street lamps glowing like halos in the damp air. Inside the compound, every corridor hums faintly, the sound of distant generators mixing with the muffled clatter of boots as guards make their rounds. You are there, standing by the observation window, watching the shadowy outlines of machinery and crates being moved into their final positions. It feels strange, like standing at the edge of history, knowing the next sunrise will not be like the last. Your colleagues move with a careful urgency, as if aware that every motion is part of a ritual. Papers are checked, seals are broken, and then replaced with new ones, each stamped with crimson wax and signed by hands that will one day be studied in dusty archives. You pass the storeroom where the sealed container rests, surrounded by layers of security, steel doors, coded locks, and an armed watch that never blinks. The object inside, so small compared to the chaos it could unleash, sits in its cradle, waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes midnight. The sound is low and deliberate, echoing through the walls like the heartbeat of the building itself. You close your eyes for a moment and let it settle in your chest. The end of one chapter, the unthinkable beginning of another. In this stillness, you can almost hear the faint ticking of the future, counting down. Soon, the world will change, not with a scream, not with a crash, but with a moment so quiet. Only those inside these walls will know it happened, and you will be among them, a witness to the turning of an age.